Sherlock Holmes was the epitome of Victorian crime solving. When thinking about Victorian detectives, it is hard not to think about famous fictional character Sherlock Holmes. Holmes was a great way to subdue public fears, which were rising about crime. Holmes was first introduced in the 1887 story A Study in Scarlet, and quickly became an icon of intelligence and deductive reasoning traits the public would begin to project onto other detectives in the real world. A lot of women were hanged for poisoning their husbands with arsenic. One of the most common cases of murder was poison by arsenic, an act which was frequently committed by women, so much so that a bill was introduced saying that only adult men could buy arsenic. A House of Commons committee investigation into poisoning found that 77% of women hanged between 1843 and 1852 were convicted of murder by poisoning. However, only 15 more women were tried for murder by poisoning than men between 1840 and 1850. So the idea of only banning women from buying poison might be a bit sexist, to say the least. Without forensic science, it was difficult to conclude with certainty whether or not someone was a murderer, but they hanged them anyways. Even with little to no evidence, a person could be hanged for murder just on the conjecture of a few neighbors and the mood of the jury. For example, the servant girl Eliza Fenny had only the testimony of the middle-class family she served working against her. She was accused of poisoning their food, even though she ate the food and became sick as well. Traces of arsenic were supposedly found, but at that time, there were no definitive tests to detect small amounts of arsenic. Basically, Fenning died because her bosses decided she should. Judges had a lot of power in the courts. Victorian trials had judges and juries, but the judges exercised a lot more power than they do now. It was a time in which the public was determined that crime could be beaten, and judges exercised harsh punishments. The death penalty was reserved for murderers and traitors to the crown, and many petty criminals were sent off to penal colonies in Australia. One judge, Baron Alderson, passed down the harshest punishment, death by hanging, to a woman named Sarah Dasley for poisoning her husband and child without sufficient evidence, even though she was never tried for the murder of her child. Another judge sentenced a woman named Lucy Ellis, or Lucy Lowe, to death by hanging for the murder of her child. England had what was called common law, which made equality in sentencing difficult. England in the 19th century was staunchly against a Roman-inspired law, the kind implemented by Napoleon, and relied on what they called common law, which they believed to be more inherent to their rugged Britishness. The issue with common law, which worked by relying on judges' decisions in previous cases, is that it made it difficult to have, ironically, a common law. Judges could have completely different ideas of justice, and therefore basing laws off of one judge's ruling wouldn't necessarily help in every case. Detectives used crime scene photography in a really weird way with one of Jack the Ripper's victims. Although modern crime-solving techniques weren't seen as crucial to an investigation, the beginning of processes such as crime scene photography did have their roots in Victorian England. However, it wasn't used in the best way in the case of one Jack the Ripper victim. Detectives investigating the death of Mary Kelly in 1888 photographed her eyeballs in the vain hopes that her retinas would somehow reveal an image of her murderer. Needless to say, this didn't really work out. trials were short, and courtrooms were insanely crowded. Very few Victorian trials lasted longer than 2 or 3 days, and the trials were more of a public spectacle than the reserved courtroom stoicism we know today. Newspapers stirred interest, and courtroom tickets sold out fast, mostly to wealthy and important people. Sometimes, a trial could be so crowded that a diplomat would be standing practically next to the accused criminal. If you were poor and accused by a richer family, you were screwed. If you were poor and accused by a richer family, you were screwed. The detectives from Scotland Yard were the ones who investigated murders. The detectives from Scotland Yard were the ones who investigated murders. Applying science to the problem was scorned by those who preferred using their fists to find confessions. Applying science to the problem was scorned by those who preferred using their fists to find confessions. Victorians were fascinated by serial killers. Victorians were fascinated by serial killers.
Hey guys, thank you so much for the support and likes and comments down below, and also thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to see you in the next video. Then take care, bye.